Hare Krishna. My name is Brajabi Haridas, and I have the great fortune today of being interviewing His Grace Brahma Tirtha Prabhu. And when we were thinking about this interview, as you know, this month is dedicated to the Chaitanya Charitamrita. But we were also thinking, well, how about Srila Prabhupada, and then I thought, well, Brahma Tirtha Prabhu had that the book Perfect Questions, Perfect Answers came from his time with Srila Prabhupada in Lord Chaitanya's birthplace in Sri Dham Mayapur. There's a picture of the book right there. So I said, how about if we interview him about his times with Srila Prabhupada in Mayapur? And the devotees on the team said, yeah, that's a great idea. So that's how we got here today. And welcome, Brahma Tirtha Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. I'm very happy to be here.
Yeah, and we're so happy to have you. So let's dive right into it, because we don't have a lot of time. Before we talk about your time with Srila Prabhupada, could you help us understand how you got there? How does a guy from New Jersey end up in Mayapur, of all places, in the I guess it was the early 1970s? So
yeah, well,
you walk us through that a bit.
Well, we'll begin. I was born at a young age.
Oh,
So I had this attraction to India since I was a little boy, an unexplained attraction that eventually I was able to understand when I got to India. And I saw a Harinam party, which Jai Dwaita Swami was probably on around 68 in New York. And when I saw the party, I was just amazed. It was in Greenwich Village. And in those days, there were many exhibitionists in Greenwich Village. So when I saw the devotees, I said, these are the biggest exhibitions I've ever seen, or they're really into something different. And I didn't know which it was. And the mantra stuck in my mind, but I didn't know the mantra. And then a play came out on Broadway called Hair. And in the play Hair, it became a movie later on. They sing Hare Krishna, followed by Happy Marijuana. In those days, both themes seemed of interest to me. And so I learned the mantra from the album and just started chanting. And then finally, I found out where they were located at 26 2nd Avenue and went there. But they had moved. And at that time, the movement had not yet invented the sign saying we have moved. It hadn't yet been invented. That was a later invention, apparently. And then they moved down the street, further down 2nd Avenue. It took me months to find where they moved. You couldn't Google anything then. And again, the sign had not been invented. So about a year later, I made it to Henry Street. And I found them to be very strange folks indeed. So, but I was still interested. And I read the Gita several times in college. And I said, okay, if I want to understand this Gita, I'm really going to have to go to India. At that time, there were a lot of weird groups coming to America. After Prabhupada, you had Rajneesh and Guru Maharajji and different folks coming. And so I said, the only way I'll find out what's going on is to go to India. And so I signed up for an American program called the Peace Corps, in which very hard to get in, but very easy.
It's still going on.
Oh, it is. Okay. Not in India, though. They threw us out when I was there.
I wonder why. Go ahead.
Well, because India and Pakistan had a war, and India sided with the Soviet Union, and America sided with Pakistan in the Cold War politics. And since the Peace Corps was part of the American government, that took care of that. So getting the Peace Corps was very difficult. Getting India apparently was very easy because no one wanted India, and I asked for India. So shortly after I graduated college, I was on a plane to India, and then I was assigned to the state of Bihar, which is kind kind of a backward state in India, politically, economically, socially, in almost every regard. And in Bihar, I was assigned to probably the most backward place in Bihar. Is considered an Adivasi territory in the south. And fortunately, it was the closest place the Peace Corps had to Calcutta. So I used to go there to visit, just to visit a large city. I was quite rural. And I ran into the Giriraj. I saw a poster, Hare Krishna Festival. I said, well, finally, I'll find out if Hare Krishna is a legitimate thing in India. Because I would ask around, as you know, do you chant Hare Krishna? And I would get these indescript answers. So I could never figure it out. And I was quite bewildered being in India. I would go to temples, mosques, and ask, why are you praying? And the whole praying mood in India was like, and we would compare it to Amazon.com nowadays, where you go and you deposit your punya points. Nowadays, it's your credit card, and the next day something's delivered to your door. So when I go to the temples, people were. I said, "Why are you praying? What are you here for? What's it about?" I wanted to understand the origins of the culture, and I want money. I want this. I want that. It was a big I want. I later learned it was karma kanda. And I was very disappointed. I thought I had gone halfway around the world to get Delhi belly and find nothing new. And then Giriraj Swami was speaking at this pandal.
He wasn't a Swami yet, right?
Giriraj Brahmachari was speaking at a pandal in 1971 in Calcutta, in a wealthy neighborhood. And his talk, I still remember it, was so brilliant. It was the first time in months and months in India somebody made philosophical sense. I said, maybe the Krishnas really do have it. And so I started, whenever I could make it to Calcutta, it was an overnight train ride, I would stay at the Salvation Army guest house and visit the temple. And one time I was there, and a devotee said, we're having a food relief program for Bangladesh refugees. The war with India and Pakistan had just finished. It was quite chaotic scene in Calcutta with the population doubling overnight.
Right.
And I thought to go help out food relief sounded like a nice thing to do. I was free of my teaching assignment that time frame. So I went up to Mayapur, not knowing what it was, not knowing anything about anything.
Krishna's arrangement.
It was. I mean, I had read the Gita. I was chanting Hare Krishna by then for 4 years, not knowing much about it. I hadn't read Prabhupada's Gita. It hadn't been available to me. I read kind of some Mayavadi Gitas that turned me off, but the Gita turned me on. So it was kind of that situation. And then when I went to Mayapur, Tejas, Prabhupada's disciple, met me as I got off the boat crossing the river, and he saw an American coming, and there were no guests at the first Mayapur festival of first Gaur Purnima festival, and he saw an American
ISKCON Gaur Purnima festival.
ISKCON Gaur Purnima. There were no guests whatsoever except Bengali villagers. And he saw me getting off the boat, and he had been in the Peace Corps, it turns out. And we immediately hit it off, started talking, and he took me up to the encampment. Now, Mayapur then was two buildings, a straw, what's now Prabhupada's Bhajan Kutir. It's been rebuilt after floods, but it's similar to what it was. Chutananda Swami then had built it for Prabhupada. Really? And the second building was a straw outhouse for Prabhupada. But that building didn't last very long because somebody had the brilliant idea to stick a stick of incense in it. And that went poof up in flames. So we had one building. and a men's tent, a women's tent, and a pandal tent. And
That's it.
That was it. And
Right.
the food relief program. And it was the Gaur Purnima time. And that point, this is about Lord Chaitanya. I didn't really know much about Lord Chaitanya, except one thing I knew. I had devotees in Calcutta had explained to me that he was in Krishna appearing. Now that alarmed me and intrigued me, because I had been in India long enough to hear about quite a few incarnations.
Right.
And I was living in Patna for a while, and I was visiting the one group. I guess I can say the name, the Ananda Marg, and they had a lot of Americans dressed in traditional Indian clothes, so people I could relate to. And I asked them about their guru, and they told me their guru was God. I said, that's very interesting to me. Where is he? I'd like to meet him. You mean, who doesn't want to meet God? Oh, he's been arrested. And they said, oh, what jail is he at? Well, he's in the prison hospital. Well, what's wrong with him? He's God. Well, his hemorrhoids got bad. Well, I scratched that off my list of potential candidates to be God, because I didn't think God would be in a hospital with hemorrhoids. It just didn't fit the picture.
That wasn't your idea growing up.
No. And I met another fellow in New Delhi who told me he met God, an American fellow. He was my age and clean cut. In India, the only people my age then, I was 22, were hippies.
Right.
Long hair and quite unshowered. And so when I met, and the Peace Corps made us cut all our hair off before we went. So we all went to the barber college and got the buzz. So when I saw someone my age and clean cut, I was curious. He said, I came here looking for God. I said, great. So, well, I met this guru in South India, and he's quite amazing. He can make things appear out of his hand, and he can do all mystical things, and he knows the Gita inside out. I was intrigued. And then the fellow says, and I became his secretary. I said, wow. I said, this is it. This is why I came to India. He knows the Gita. He can do mystical things. That was quite interesting to me. And then it dawned on me. I said, but why are you in New Delhi? He says, well, I'm going home. Oh, why are you going home? And excuse the grossness. He said, I got tired of him reaching in my pants.
Wow. Hare Krishna.
And I said, oh my God, scratch that one off the list.
Yes.
So when
two strikes.
When the devotees told me that Lord Chaitanya was incarnation, I was intrigued and skeptical.
Of course, after everything you've been through so far.
Yeah. Yet there was something about chanting Hare Krishna, because the mantra just went deep with me, and it's like a song in our head. We hear a song. Those from India, Bollywood, those from America, Bruce Springsteen, and we can't get the song out of our head. And so similarly, the mantra was stuck with me. I said, okay. And the devotees, I really liked them, even though they were sometimes a little strange. They actually had a level of renunciation that appealed to me, and a philosophical understanding that I hadn't met anyplace else in India. Mm-hmm. So I said, maybe this could be real. So then, so I went to Mayapur with a great desire to understand a little more about who this Chaitanya was.
Right.
I understood it was a birthplace. I learned that right away. I wanted to know who he was, and could this be something real? Because something inside me said, there is something phony, but there is something real. I just knew there was. Mm-hmm. And so then Teja said, "Would you like to meet Prabhupada?"
No kidding.
And I said, "Well, I met Prabhupada very briefly in Calcutta in November,
Really?
71. I had been at the temple. I used to, when I'd make it to Calcutta, again, it was an overnight train ride, and my pay was only a few hundred rupees a month, so I had to count paisa. But I was in Calcutta, and Prabhupada in devotee, and he was in the temple, and Prabhupada, somebody devotee said, "You can come and sit." So I sat inside, and Prabhupada talked to me. "Who are you? What are you here for?"
Really?
I said,
Wow.
"As a science teacher, and I'm curious." So he says, "Do you have any questions?" And then I asked my first stupid question, and it was really stupid. And the question I asked was, I'd just come from Bodh Gaya, where I sat under the alleged sapling in the original tree where the Buddha got enlightenment. And I sat there and I said, "Now I'll get enlightenment." And nothing happened because it's not cheap, I learned later. And then I was hungry like anything. So there was a Tibetan Buddhist camp nearby. I said, "Well, I'll go there. I can get a vegetarian lunch." And they had nothing vegetarian. So the whole thing was very disappointing to me. I couldn't figure out what was going on. So when I saw Prabhupada, though, I'd been recently in Bodh Gaya. So I said, "Prabhupada, why not Buddhism?" And Prabhupada gave, if any of you have really studied Prabhupada, you can guess what his answer was. When I said, "Why not Buddhism?" Prabhupada didn't like discussing isms. And several times he said to me, "Not this ism or that ism." We discussed philosophy. He didn't want to have sectarian debates. And it was, he said it to me several times. And of course, he said it to others many times. So when I asked about Buddhism, Prabhupada's immediate response was, "What did the Buddha say?" He wants to discuss philosophy. What did I think the Buddha said? And we'll discuss the philosophy, not an ism. Very important point. So I said, "Well, he had a fourfold noble and ate this, or was it ate that and four this?" And I went on muttering and mumbling to myself. Finally, I turned to him and said, "Prabhupada, I don't know. I can't remember." He said, "Then why are you asking?"
Really?
If you don't know what the Buddha said, then why are you asking this? And so at that point, I learned the first lesson. I ought to listen. So I just kept quiet, and Prabhupada would then begin a conversation. There was other people in the room with others, and I just stayed quiet. And then I left. And then, so that was my first brief encounter.
In the Gita, Prabhupada talks about absurd inquiry. That might have fit into that category.
It did. You're correct. It was an absurd inquiry. It had no basis. I had some attraction to Buddhism because I'd studied it in college, and we all read,
in those days we all read those things.
Books of the time, the Watts books and series, the popular books of the time.
Was Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance already out?
That was out, and later on I learned Watts died, who was the popular Buddhist author. Cirrhosis of the liver due to alcoholism, and but in the town I lived in had been mostly vegetarian until 10 years before I got there. One Hindu preacher came, and he gave a class. And I was told about the class. And the class was right from the Gita. Deos minyata dehe. You are not this body. And the animals aren't this body. Therefore, you can eat them. And the whole town became non-veg overnight. And the only vegetarian in the town was one of my teacher colleagues who was a Buddhist. It's rare to find a Buddhist in India. And so I had some attraction to Buddhism because vegetarian was important to me.
Right.
Though I didn't really become strictly vegetarian until I met Prabhupada. And
So
even
tell us
then,
about that then. So you met Prabhupada the second time in Mayapur?
yes. So
Uh-huh.
then when I met Prabhupada, the first part of our conversation was not recorded. I wish it
Oh,
had been. So the
ouch.
book begins Perfect Questions in an odd place. It begins in the middle of a conversation. We had a conversation, then the conversation ended, and then Prabhupada called me back. In fact, for the 3 days we were conversing, he would call me back multiple times a day to come see him.
So
And,
Tejas, how did it begin? Tejas meets you at the Ghat
and
and says, "Do you want to meet Prabhupada?" And
yeah,
he
and
just
then
like
they
walks you
put
up to
me in a
Prabhupada.
tent. They put me in a tent. I put my stuff down, and
Uh-huh.
I think
You're
I
lucky
might
if your
have.
stuff is still there, but anyway, that's another thing.
Well, it was things were pretty. I mean, the tent had a guard,
Okay.
so because there were
Anyway, I'm
villagers
sorry.
who,
That was a bad
yeah, no, there was a real
unnecessary
issue
statement.
because there were villagers who would kind of um, wander in, so they had a guard at the tent. So only the devotees, but there were, I don't
Okay.
know, 50,
So it's just
70
there.
devotees there, something
Really,
like.
that many? Okay.
I was, yeah, and there was one guest. Now that
You.
becomes very, very important. Yes. And
Okay.
everyone was very anxious to preach. And the average age was probably 22. So everyone was super anxious to preach, preach, preach. And there was one person to preach to, one. And so Prabhupada kept me in his hut with him all day. I'm convinced for the main purpose of protecting me from 70 people preaching to me constantly.
Amazing.
And some of them, I couldn't tell if somebody had been a super senior advanced devotee who had been in the movement 5 years. That would be the max, maybe then.
Very senior, yes.
And somebody had joined the previous week. I couldn't tell
Right.
the difference.
They
But
all look 25 years old.
well, they did. And so, and there were wonderful devotees there, like Yadabara and Vishaka and
Wow.
Giriraj Brahmachari, and there were wonderful devotees. And there was some very strange devotees whose names I will leave out,
Okay. Cool.
who were, let's put it this way, over enthusiastic, is how I would put it. So when I started speaking with Prabhupada, at that point, um, um, well, when the book begins, that's not the right place for the book to begin. And in a future edition, I should write up what happened in the first conversation.
That would be
Obviously, I don't
nice.
remember the details, but Prabhupada asked, "Who are you? Why are you here?" The normal things that would happen. Yes, I'd met you in Calcutta. Prabhupada said, "Yes, I remember." He didn't reference my stupid question, thank God. And uh, and so the book begins, unfortunately, afterwards. What happened is Shamasundar was the secretary, and after the first conversation, he had a very limited number of cassette tapes. So
Cassette tapes.
he
Yes.
didn't record everything because there was a shortage of cassette tapes. At that
Ouch.
point, he said, "This sounds interesting," and hit the record button. I had no idea. I wasn't paying attention at all. And so then the conversation began, and we're starting to discuss science. But there had been a previous discussion discussing, I was a science teacher, and Prabhupada had made the point that you really can't be a teacher unless you know the absolute truth. I said, well, I can teach things that lead up to the absolute truth. There are tendencies, like when you study chemistry and the periodic table, you can see that there's some creator behind it. And Prabhupada appreciated that on one hand. And on the other hand, he said it's such incomplete knowledge. You need to know who this creator is. And so some of that was before the book began, and some of that's in the first chapter of the book. So my long-winded answer to it, how it got started, that's it.
Okay. And then what happened?
Well, then Prabhupada would call me in, and I'd be serving out. I was serving prasadam.
Okay. To the devotees.
Yeah,
Not to
no,
Prabhupada.
to the tens of
Oh,
thousands
to
of
the refugees. Yeah.
from Bangladesh. Hindus had fled Bangladesh.
Right.
And so I was serving, and devotee would come running up to me. Prabhupada wants to see you. I would
Oh,
say, I can't.
wow.
I have my place in line. You know, it's a system. And they said, don't worry, we'll cover you. Just go.
They must
So,
have thought you were nuts.
well, I was told to stand here and serve prasadam. So I did my duties. I said, sure. So I went to see Prabhupada. When I'd go, I didn't offer obeisances. I would just fold my hands in the typical namaste fashion and sit down at Prabhupada's feet. It was on a low platform. And the whole time I was there, except when I was directly talking to him, I'd be looking at his feet.
Really?
Yeah, I just had that image in my mind. And in my first conversation with him, a thought went through my mind, and I specifically remember the thought. Now, I said, I don't know if this is the, as we would say now, pure devotee. My terminology then was a realized soul. I don't know, but something about him and something about his disciples and something about Lord Chaitanya all seems to fit. So I said, I am going to assume he's a realized soul. I'm going to assume, and I'm only going to ask my questions. I'm going to talk to him as if he's a realized soul. And later on, when I have time to process and think about it, I'll come to my own conclusion, but I'm not going to try to figure that out now.
Well, that's really interesting, because
Yeah.
Prabhupada tells us to do that in the Gita. He says, at least in the introductions, at least theoretically, accept Krishna as the Supreme Personality of God as you're reading the Bhagavad Gita, to get something out of it. Yeah. So,
and then in the Gita, there's a verse, and it says, approach a spiritual master. I did. Inquire submissively. I did. Render service. I did. I was serving out prasadam. If I wasn't with him, I was serving out prasadam. I mean, the queue went on forever.
Right, yeah.
And at one time, they assigned me to watch cheaters, people who try to get seconds before everyone got first.
That must have been fun.
Yeah, yeah. Everyone was kind of cooperative. It was people were appreciative, but nevertheless, different duties. So in the Gita, Krishna says, approach spiritual master, inquire submissively. By accident, I hit the right formula. And then the self-realized soul can give you the truth. I hit the formula without knowing it.
Wow.
I was lucky.
Yeah. Well, you were, fortunate. Yeah. So this, how many days did this go on
3 days. 3 days.
3 days.
After a full day of meeting, I think the first or second day of talking with Prabhupada, I think after 2 days, it might have been, it was full moon, Gaur Purnima.
Oh, it was Gaur Purnima.
This was the first Gaur Purnima festival. See, they had bought the land a month or two before. It was impossible to buy land, and Tamal Krishna Maharaj and others had pulled off the impossible. And Prabhupada said, we're going to do a festival for Gaur Purnima. And devotees complained. There was nothing there. Prabhupada said, we're doing a festival. So Chutananda built a hut. They brought in tents. When I was in Mayapur then, there was one thing you could buy. There was one vendor on a bicycle with a few coconuts. There were shops. There was nothing you can do. The water was horrible to drink because they just put in a tube well. So fresh tube wells, the water is white. The sediment doesn't settle.
Right.
I mean, the outhouse was a hole in the ground with maybe something around it. But, I mean, amazing. I was 22. People pay a lot of money to camp out. So
that's right. That's right.
Free. I didn't care. It didn't. I mean, I was healthy. I ate well. I mean, it was khichdi every day, and I had my mosquito net, so everything was fine.
Oh, you had that's luxury.
I always traveled in India. I knew I had a mosquito net, a sleeping bag, a sushi kit, and a change of underwear. What else does one need in life?
Exactly.
But there was nothing. There was no shops. There was no wall. There was nothing.
Was it beautiful?
Oh,
Was
it's
Mayapur?
exquisitely beautiful. It was just rice paddies. You know, it was dry season, so I mean, there wasn't anything in them, and there was the river nearby, and there was coconut.
Yeah, you
It
see the
looked like
picture?
that.
You see the picture at
Yeah,
79? That's 79.
yeah, it looked just like that, but no buildings. I
No
mean,
buildings, yeah. I was
and
there in that year, 79.
and you would hear from the other temples. They maybe a loudspeaker, and it was just idyllic. I can go for a walk down through these little villages nearby, and it was very calming for the nerves. The Ganges River was in. One day, devotee said, "We're going swimming," so I grabbed a gumsha and just went in the river.
Uh-huh.
Um, so um, but generally, I didn't have time for anything else because Prabhupada kept calling me all day to see him. And so after one night, one evening, it
Wonderful.
was full moon, Gaur Purnima, Yamuna. And I thanked Yamuna for this several times. Yamuna came up to me. And Yamuna, for those who knew her, was one of the more advanced devotees in the movement. Sometimes people uh, wonder, of course, we have her biography and her classes, but I saw her as one of the most loving people I met in Mayapur. I couldn't, and she came up and love bombed me. And by that I meant she had tears in her eyes. There were no lights, just the moonlight. And there was a generator that would sometimes provide pandal lights, but that was on and off. It was India. We had no electricity there. And she came with tears glistening in the moonlight and said to me, "You are so fortunate. Prabhupada is spending all day with you. All day. This is, I think, 2 days in a row now. All day, Prabhupada is with you. He's giving you all of his attention." I was probably the last devotee up until Bhakti Swami to join the movement in which Prabhupada personally gave so much time. In the early days, Prabhupada cooked, cleaned the pots, and did everything for everyone.
Right.
But by 72, ISKCON was very large and growing exponentially. So it wasn't that Prabhupada would spend much time with some new bhakta. And I was probably the last one till Bhakti Swami joined in early 77 that got so much of Prabhupada's attention. So she comes up to me and was telling me how lucky I was and fortunate. And the tears were in her eyes. And she said it was such love that all of a sudden I got very scared. I got terrified.
How's that?
Because I was speaking to Prabhupada very theoretically. What about this? What about that? And who is Krishna? And I didn't want to get personal. I didn't want it to be about me. And then I went behind, after she talked to me, I went behind the pandal into the dry rice paddies, and I just went for a walk, and I collapsed and started crying.
Wow.
I said, because I didn't want to give up. I was engaged to be married, and I'd have to lose my hair and lose everything, and I just couldn't give it all up. And so the next day, Prabhupada calls me in, and I say to Prabhupada, "Thank you very much. Now I have to leave to go back to teach." And Prabhupada goes, "Don't talk Leave."
Really?
Gave a long pause. He said, "Talk Live. Don't talk leave, talk live." And I said, "So you want me to stay longer?" And he says, "Yes." And I said, "Okay." And then he said the magic words to me. Those of you who have a pet dog, let's say, what do you say to the pet dog when the dog behaves well? You go, "Good boy."
Right.
"Good boy." "Good girl," like that. So Prabhupada said to me, "Good boy." And I had grown up with a pet dog when I was a kid. And I understood at that moment I was Prabhupada's dog.
Wow. how sweet.
Good boy. And at that moment, then the conversation changed. It's subtle. He started talking about me. And it was about my obstacles to advancing, my concerns, my anxieties. And it became very personal. The whole
Wow.
conversation changed. And then there was one thing I wanted to share too. There was a very mystical occurrence, super mystical thing happened. Somehow I think your audience, the audience listening, likes to hear of a mystical story. Now, I've told
Sure,
this
of course.
before, so some might have heard it. When I studied the Gita in college, under John Kohler, he's well-known author of books on East-West philosophy. I studied the Gita, and I read it, and now I didn't know any Sanskrit at all. I had, by then I knew some Hindi, but no Sanskrit.
Right.
And when I studied in college, I didn't know any Sanskrit at all. There's no such thing. When I studied the Gita, and this verse came up, even if one commits a pichetudacharo, the most abominable activities, if he's engaged in devotional service, considered saintly because he's properly situated in his determination. When I read that in, that was Dr. Radhakrishna's Gita at that time. When I read that verse, it bewildered me. Why, of all the verses in the Gita, would that one bewilder me so much? It took me a while to figure it out, but it bewildered me because I was a very digital thinker, black and white at that time. It took me a while to learn. When I heard Achinta Beta Beta Tattva, which is not digital, to use a computer metaphor, analog thinking, shades of gray, took me a while to get my brain to adjust to that. But when I read that verse, I said, Professor, look, you're either good or you're bad. I mean, this verse makes no sense to me.
That's how we thought when we were 20. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. We were all very young. At that age, we tend to be very black and white. And I didn't understand, and the professor didn't understand it. He said, oh, it's obvious what it means, which means he had no idea. So the very first verse Prabhupada quoted to me, very first one in Sanskrit was that verse.
Really?
And Prabhupada knew by then I didn't know Sanskrit. And then he said, so you know this? And I did know it. It was the only verse I knew in English in Gita. That was mystical. It took me a while to figure out that mysticism. Then a few years ago, I was rereading Perfect Questions. For decades, I couldn't read it for a reason I can explain. But I was rereading it, and that was also the last verse Prabhupada quoted in the book. Very mystical.
Wow. Very mystical. Yeah. So it's interesting because on one hand, you were saying how Prabhupada kept you there to kind of protect you from the zealous preachers. And at the other hand, there was like these amazing devotees, Jamuna, Yadubar, Vishaka, Giriraj Swami, Tejas Prabhu. I mean, those are some really special, advanced ISKCON devotees there.
I'm not going to name the names of the ones who weren't so advanced.
Right.
Quite jealous. I'll give an example. I caught a little cold, whatever.
Right.
So one devotee gives me a half-hour lecture on taking these allopathic medicines as poison and how I'm in Maya and how terrible it was.
Gotcha.
And
Okay.
a half-hour lecture. Then the next devotee says, gee, I heard you have some medicines. I have a cold. Do you have anything? And so that was going on. All those kind of interactions were going on quite a bit.
Right. Right. So you couldn't always be associating with these devotees that I just mentioned, obviously.
Yeah.
You were open game. You were like open game, right? It's like, it's like new devotee, new visitor hunting season.
Yeah. One devotee, I won't mention the name, but a big guy. And I was in the back watching an artique, and one devotee wasn't dancing enough. So he went up to him, shook him up and down like this, dance, dance, dance. And the devotee was terrified and started dancing.
Well, that'll do it, right?
Yeah. So, like I said, it was a mix. It was a mixed bag.
Yeah.
Yadabara was wonderful because he and Vishaka, he had been in the Peace Corps too.
Oh, really?
India,
Also,
but not India. And they were like a normal couple. And they were just really nice, such nice, normal people I could relate to.
Right.
I didn't spend much time with Gary Raj at Brahma Tirtha because he was doing a lot of organizing, and nor I don't even remember TKG. He must have been, I don't know, I just don't remember. And a lot of the devotees who were really qualified people were very busy organizing.
Sure. Doing
Those
stuff.
who weren't
Yeah.
so busy were kind of the new people who were looking for a victim to preach to.
Yeah. So this it's so touching, this good boy. And you said how everything kind of changed then. It's kind of like, I'm thinking of the Bhagavad Gita. There's something that they call the rasa sandhi, where there was a change in rasa when in the early parts of the second chapter of the Gita, when Arjuna says, now I'm a soul surrendered unto you, please instruct me. And actually, I think they say the rasa sandhi happens like 3 verses later on to the 10th verse. But sounds like that's kind of what happened. There was, you were a newcomer, and there was a certain rapport with Prabhupada, but when he kind of said "good boy," and that changed the relationship, huh?
Dramatically so, because at that point, I did a very minor, little, huge way. He gave me an instruction and I followed it. And that tiny instruction, just stay a little longer, was a huge thing, because I was getting scared and wanted to leave. He said, stay. It might seem such a minor point, but for me, it was a big deal.
It's huge.
And that was my surrender. And after that, I knew I was, this was my fate. And people ask me this question: what was it like being with Prabhupada? And he was really easy. Prabhupada had a constant sense of humor. And as I look back at times I was with Prabhupada, I see many times the humor went over our heads.
Right.
Generational, cultural.
We were really young, and a generational, cultural,
And Prabhupada was really, very light, very easy to be with. And he kept, he would smile and laugh and then get serious. And he would control my mood by his mood. And as I surrendered more during the conversation, I would get in sync with his mood. Gotcha. And Prabhupada, it was a very mystical process. Prabhupada could pull me in. I didn't know that the whole doorway to his room was full of heads all the way around. I
listening in.
It's me and Prabhupada and Shama Sundar. And I didn't, Prabhupada so attracted me. I never turned my head once to see that there were, 20, 30 people there.
Wow. It's interesting that you say because we're celebrating the Chaitanya Charitamrita. So asking you to stay is something kind of like you hear a lot in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, like not that you're Lord Chaitanya, obviously, but they would say, well, you should stay for this till this festival's over, or at least sometimes they say stay 2 or 4 more days. So it's a theme that we see sometimes in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, and in Prabhupada telling you, don't leave, live.
And it was. And at one point, I went for a walk with some devotees to the yoga pit, and they were explaining to me, and of course I'd already spent some time with Prabhupada, who Lord Chaitanya was. And the question is, how do we know if we should believe what we now read in the Chaitanya Charitamrita? Wasn't out then. I'm not sure if Teaching of Lord Chaitanya was out, but I wouldn't have seen it. Yeah, surely. No, it was definitely out by then, but I hadn't seen it. And how do we know especially in India, where you have God at every corner,
Yeah,
that
right.
Lord Chaitanya is actually the supreme person appearing. And it was something I was thinking about because it was Gaur Purnima. Devotees are talking about Lord Chaitanya constantly. I understood theoretically who he was, but how would I know if Lord Chaitanya is really? And I had, as I explained, my bad experiences in India. I only told you
Right.
2 of them, but there are plenty more. So how would I know? And I thought about that a lot when I was there.
Sure.
And the answer is, I came up with is, I'd have to judge by the followers.
Hmm.
I'd
Okay.
have to see if these followers can had the potency of who they were talking about. When I
Wow.
went to the Ananda Mar camp, they didn't have any of that potency.
Hmm.
When I went to this other camp, I'm not mentioning the name, but talked to their people. And even the new oddball, fanatical disciples of Prabhupada, they were chanting Hare Krishna, and I recognized they had a potency about them, a
Hmm.
potency that I did not have.
Right. Right. So, what was it like when you were leaving? What was going through your mind as you're getting back on the boat, crossing the whatever it was, the Jalangi or the Ganga? Um, what was going through your mind? Like when Prabhupada met Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, right, his friend asked him at the end, "What was it like?" And he said, "Oh, I met a very nice, saintly person," or something to that effect. What was going through your mind as you were like, you have your, I think at that time, fiance back in
Yeah,
America. You
yeah.
had to go back to teaching, I assume, for a little while, and you were leaving Prabhupada's association. What was going through your mind at that time?
I need a break. I need to think about it. So I went
Mm,
back to my town in Bihar, and I had 2 colleagues, and I said, let's go on a little vacation.
mm.
And so they said, let's go to a beach. So we went to a beach town, Jagannath Puri. I had no idea what Puri was or anything about anything.
But Krishna's really taking care of you.
And so we went to a beach and stayed at a bed and breakfast, was what we'd call it nowadays, right on the beach. I'm sure it's a condo now, run by a British lady left over from the Raj,
Mm,
with afternoon tea kind of thing.
sure.
And I would be in the ocean where Lord Chaitanya swam, and
Sure.
no idea about it. Um, I knew there was a temple there that I wasn't allowed in. That's all I knew.
Uh-huh.
I didn't know
Right.
who Jagannath was. And so I went to Puri to kind of chill out and digest it all.
Amazing.
And the atmosphere of Puri was just what I needed, though I had no idea where I was or what it was. I just knew it was closest beach town to us.
Right.
And there I started thinking and trying to digest it. I had no idea there would be a book out or anything like this. I had no idea
No, of
about
course not at that time. Yeah.
And then I made a decision. I said, I have to leave India now. I can't stay here anymore. I had a purpose of coming to India. I met it, and I don't want to stay here anymore. And they were about to throw us out of India anyway, but I didn't wait. I resigned
Mm.
my job, and I went to Bombay to check out, and I have 3 days to go home. And if I don't leave in 3 days, they take away my ticket. So I went to a medical exam, and they poked my liver and was terribly swollen. I didn't have any symptoms. They said, you have to stay 2 weeks and take this pills. So I then heard about heart. I went to the address of the temple, but they had moved to Juhu.
Oh.
So I heard they were at Juhu. So I took the train up to Juhu. And when I got there, was a poster, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, still speaking. And I said, wow, Prabhupada's still here. And I ran all the way down that road when you get off the train to Juhu, thinking Prabhupada would be there. And the poster gave certain dates, but they were wrong. He had gone to Africa. And it was good. I wasn't ready to see Prabhupada. And so I ended up staying at Juhu for 2 weeks. There was no buildings. We lived in tents on the roofs of the buildings.
Yep.
And so I ended up staying there for 2 weeks. And that gave me a chance to really digest what happened, but I wouldn't absorb it. And then Sarabi came to me one day. There was Tulsi Puja on the roof of the building at 5 o'clock in the morning, and I'm watching it. And he says, stop licking the jar of honey already. Go dance around Tulsi. So what am I going to do, dance around a plant? Yeah, come on, I'm a scientist. So I did, because he asked me to. And it was mystical. It was absolutely mystical. So Krishna gave me an extra 2 weeks there to kind of give me a
devotee
chance.
association.
And really nice association. Giriraj was there, others, Madhu Visa.
Wow.
Really sweet devotees. It was chaos at Juhu in those days, absolute chaos. But Giriraj stayed so calm and cool in the middle of chaos. And he was the first devotee I'd heard speak a lot, many months before in Calcutta.
Right.
So I just lived on the roof of the building for those 2 weeks that Krishna gave me. And then that kind of cemented, this is my path. Krishna gave me a special break.
Wow. Yeah, it's so clear Krishna's guiding you along in this whole trip, the whole time that you've been explaining things. Puri, Bombay, Prabhupada, everything. You're hearing Giriraj Swami. It's amazing. It's very faith building to see how Krishna arranged things for you.
It was.
And
the
so
austerity. Go on.
Well, I was just going to say, we only have a few minutes left. So the book, for many devotees, it's one of the first books that we've read. For me, it was one of the first books I read.
Me too.
1976. Yeah. So it was already out It was already out during Prabhupada's time.
Prabhupada wrote me a letter. The book is coming out. And when I got back to New York from India, some months later, Jayadvaita Brahmachari comes up to me and says, we got this manuscript. Prabhupada had written me a letter. We're making a book out of it. We want you to do fidelity, check the tape against the transcription, because it was very noisy at Mayapur. So the tape was hard to transcribe. So who's better than to do fidelity than me? I was there. Mm-hmm. So my first service was fidelity. I still have the manuscript, 108 pages.
Wow. Amazing. 108. Good number. Yeah, because for many devotees, it was one of the, I remember, I think I got Back to Godhead magazine. I got that book, and it was very helpful. I was like, who's this person? Bob,
Everyone was bhakta this or bhakta that by the mid 70s. I was never bhakta. I was always Peace Corps Bob somehow.
Peace Corps Bob. Yes. Yeah. Amazing. Well, Brahma Tirtha Prabhu, our time is coming to an end. Any last words of wisdom that you'd like to share with us?
Yeah. This year, I'm focusing my reading on Chaitanya Charitamrita. Uh-huh. And what impresses me about it is the modernity of it. When we read the Bhagavatam, it's a different culture. Mm-hmm. Not necessarily a Vedic culture, because Krishna says, the science has been lost. I've come to give it back. But a different culture, a different time. Mm-hmm. The Chaitanya Charitamrita is so modern. I mean, Prabhupada points out, you take, this is a train stop where you can see this place or that place. Right. And we still have manuscripts from that time. It's so modern and it's so relatable. To me, the Chaitanya Charitamrita represents, it's as much Shastra as the Bhagavatam or any of our other key literatures, yet its modernity gives us a relatability that, to me, is what I needed. That I can relate, and especially the Chaitanya Charitamrita is constantly discussing the relationships among devotees and how sweet the relationships are, and what hurts the relationships, and what makes the relationships work. And it's a guidebook on how we can relate to each other. And it's just such a practical literature. The Bhagavatam, we can't relate to extensive Vedic sacrifices and snake birds coming to bite us. These are good stories for us to learn from. And there's certainly many lessons there. But the Chaitanya Charitamrita is at the same time Columbus was coming to America.
That's right. I used to always say he went back to Godhead, because it says anyone who was on the planet with Lord Chaitanya went back. So Columbus Day is like a Vaishnav holiday.
Don't tell that to the American Indians. Okay.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's very nice. Yes, yes, and that's so nice you're saying that, because we are celebrating that this whole month, and we've heard so many good talks already on the Chaitanya Charitamrita, and more to come. So, on behalf of the strategic planning team for the GBC, we want to really thank you so much, Brahma Tirtha Prabhu, for taking your time for your and I know your incredibly busy schedule to be with us, and all the best. Hare Krishna.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.